Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to share with you the top 10 tips that I wish I knew when I was first starting out as a food photographer. So let's get started. So these are all tips that I believe would make me grow much better, much quicker, and I wish I had known them when I first started out because it would have taken away a lot of the trial and error that I did have to do when I first started out. The first tip is you can absolutely start on automatic mode. When I first started out, I was watching tons of tutorials trying to learn the ins and outs of my camera, and this was the first time I had ever picked up a camera to begin with. So I didn't really know much about it to start. And I felt like in order to be a successful photographer, I needed to know all of these little nuances that the camera had, even the simple things. It's like aperture, shutter speed, ISO, and all that. I just didn't know anything about it, and I spent a long time trying to learn more about it. Most cameras these days have a really good automatic setting anyways, so then it doesn't hurt you at all to start out on the automatic mode and slowly learn the ins and outs of your camera and learn it more through trial and error rather than just trying to read it and not really actually doing it. Like I said, the cameras these days have really good automatic settings, like the lighting gets pretty good, the autofocus has gotten really great, and you can oftentimes just tap on cameras because a lot of them have touch screens these days, and it really just makes it a lot easier to start getting better and start learning more about like composition and styling and those sorts of aspects that are really going to up your images even when you do learn your camera's manual settings. The second tip is to use color to your advantage. I didn't really think much about color when I was first starting out. I thought like, oh yeah, it just needs to be pretty, lots of colors are good and all that sort of stuff, but I didn't really think much about how the colors go together, how they appear on camera and how they appear on people's phones, on web pages and all that sort of stuff. So I never really had that at the forefront of my mind because I never thought it was a big deal. But now after researching more about just food photography and photography in general, I found out that there is lots of different tricks and colors that you can put together that makes the image just pop that much more and is just so much more pleasing to look at for your viewers. I would really suggest you learn more about color theory, research that a bit, and just learn which colors go very well together and which ones maybe don't go so well together, so you can either just avoid those or just adjust the colors as needed. Tip number 3 is to never shoot with the shutter speed higher than 1/60. That means so just don't shoot at like 1/8, 1/10. Anything above 1/60 will give you a blurry image, and especially if you have shaky hands like me, almost all of my images at the start were blurry because I always had my shutter speed super low to compensate for the other settings that I wasn't positive how to control yet. You can avoid this one if you do invest in a tripod straight away. I never used one starting out, so that's why I always kind of had slightly blurry images and they just weren't as crisp and clean as I would have liked them because I always had my shutter speed higher than it should have been. Tip number 4 is that brighter does not always mean better. In my experience, it's always better to slightly underexpose your image than overexpose it because it's so much easier to bring up the brightness in post-editing to fill in the gaps where it's maybe too dark in the picture, and then you can lighten up areas that you want to be lighter. It just gives you more control over the whole image. Sometimes it just doesn't really suit the mood you're going for to be super bright when you first shoot. Like if you're going for a dark and moody shoot, you can't really overexpose the image and expect to get that result, or at least a good result for that. You have to underexpose the image to have more ability to manipulate the photo how you'd like. The 5th tip is to utilize linear and radial filters in Lightroom. I spent such a long time just shooting pictures and not fixing them up how I should have in Lightroom because I didn't utilize these. I learned about them pretty early on from like other videos that I had watched, but I never really thought to implement them in my own pictures. And it is just such an easy, simple way to elevate your pictures so much more and to just bring the focus in where it needs to be. And they're really useful sometimes when you go in and you realize, oh, there's a spot that maybe is darker than I want it to, or brighter and it's just kind of blown out, but the rest of the image looks fine. Those are perfect for those situations because then you can just tone it right back down and you don't have to go out and reshoot and manipulate the light manually through that. The 6th tip I have for you guys is to have kind of a story in mind for your setting. It's really hard to set scenes and not have an idea of what kind of feeling you want it to portray to the viewer. I just found that it especially helps to just have some sort of structure to your image. Sometimes you just hit that mental block and you just cannot get the right composition no matter how many compositional techniques you apply. And oftentimes it is partially because you don't know what you're going for and what you're trying to convey from the scene. So it's really helpful for me to take a step back sometimes and just think, okay, what do I want my audience to feel and what do I want my audience to think when they see this picture? And then work from that angle compositionally to structure my image around that idea or around that feeling. Tip number 7 is to not stick to one type of lighting. I know there's a lot of photographers that seem to have their set style and it's either light and airy, dark and moody, and all that sort of stuff. But it really helps to be more well-rounded if you kind of experiment with all types. You might end up liking light and airy for a bit and you might end up liking dark and moody for a time. It really depends, but you won't know if you like the other type of styles if you never try them out. So it's really important that you don't just limit yourself to one thing. Like for instance, when I started out, I just was pure dark and moody. Like that's all I did. That was the majority of my work, was just dark and moody pictures. I've recently started branching out into more of the lighter images and I found that I really enjoy those as well, and there definitely is a time and place for those, and it really has broadened my portfolio and been more attractive for companies that I'm reaching out to. And sometimes it kind of limits you in what you can photograph, because there's definitely some subjects that aren't well suited for dark and moody pictures, but they are better suited for the lighter backgrounds and the brighter lights and that sort of thing. Same goes for the opposite. There's some things that just look better in that darker setting. So it really would limit you if you just stayed to one scene and one type of lighting. Tip number 8 is one that I learned the hard way many times. It's to think about where your picture's going before you shoot it. So I know this one kind of seems like self-explanatory, but there's been so many times where I get the perfect shot, everything is like composed exactly how I want it to be, and I edit it, it looks great, and then I go to upload it to Instagram and it doesn't fit the ratio that they have in there, and I have to cut out bits of my image that really worked towards my composition and kind of like taints the composition a bit for me. So that's just one thing to keep in mind, because you have to take that into account before you even start shooting. Because if you don't, then you can't really resize it to be any bigger. So that's one thing you have to take into account while you're shooting your image, while you're looking through your viewfinder, is just take into account the tops and bottoms might need to be cropped off if you're putting it onto Instagram. If there's a client you're working for and they've given you certain ratios, you need to make sure it's fitting that. Just because you don't want to be stuck editing and realize like, oh crap, this isn't gonna fit, and then have to sacrifice some of the quality of the image just because you didn't measure for it beforehand. Tip number 9 is that sometimes busier is better. There's a lot of times where I just really want to keep something simple because I really like the subject and I'm just like, this needs to be the star of the shot, and I can't be adding all these different aspects, but sometimes that is necessary and sometimes it really does add a lot to the image. There is a time and place for the minimalist shoots, and I do think they're coming up more and more, but busier is better a lot of the times right now. It is kind of the trend to have a lot of different things in your pictures, and it can really elevate the pictures a lot versus just having the simple shot of the subject. My 10th and final tip is to get as many shots from as many angles as you possibly can before taking down your entire setup. This one I've done since day one, and I still do it quite often in my shoots, but I'll just have my shoot up, everything's set up, all my food's perfect, and you have to get food shot pretty quickly sometimes because otherwise it just doesn't look as nice if you leave it for like a half an hour to an hour while you're shooting. So I'll shoot, and within the first 5-10 minutes I'll get a shot that I really like, and I'm like, perfect, we're all done, take down all my setup, and I'll go put my card into my laptop and start editing just to see that like it might not have been as perfect as I thought it was initially. And then there's other times when I'm editing and I think of another angle or a different type of shot with that same subject that would have been so much better and so much more effective at what I was trying to do with the picture. And I won't be able to go shoot it because either the food's been eaten already, it doesn't look nice anymore, and it's just so much extra work to set up all the studio stuff and reshoot that food. It just is annoying and it's time consuming, and it would just save me so much time and energy, and it would save you so much time and energy if you just worked through every single angle, even ones that you know won't work, just to get those creative juices flowing and to get the best shot you possibly can and not regret not getting the shot later on. So those are my 10 tips for starting out with food photography and getting better quicker without all the trial and error that you maybe have to go through initially. I hope it was helpful. I hope you learned something. If you did like this video, please give it a like and please feel free to subscribe. I'll be coming out again with more content like this, and I'll see you guys later. Thanks for watching.